Alright, now is the time we get to start cracking this engine apart. I finally got this T-handle in today. This is a heavy-duty JIS bitted T-handle. And this will allow me to put enough torque on these bolts to get them loose without damaging them. So, I'm going to prop it up like that. I've already drained the oil out of this unit, and there's still going to be a little bit of drippage, which is why we have a towel down. But this number 3 JIS should do the trick. I just got to put a good firm hold on it and crack them. But you know, this looks unstable to me. Maybe if I can maybe get them at a different angle here. Maybe I should have left the rear wheel on. Yeah, maybe. So I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to use this impact tool. And what this does, you're supposed to, well, this is the wrong bit size, but you're supposed to be able to put some glove caps on this. And it's supposed to loosen this, yeah, it's just like that. Just like that. Yeah. Should've known better. Alright. Good luck! Anyway. Always use a soft mallet to crack these loose. If this doesn't work, there is another thing we can try, which I have used, but it's controversial. This is everything else. Be prepared to be astounded. Is there anything? Oh, yep. No, I don't think that's going to be an issue. The Kickstarter spring was going to, looks like it might be a problem, but I don't think it is. I'm going to work it loose with a, no, it looks like the starter clutch has to be released. I mean, the starter spring. So, here goes nothing. Just in case it goes flying. There we go. Get that out of there. Oh, here. Perfect. Alright. And we're in, like Flynn. Okay, got the cover off, and let's take a good look at what we have, what kind of a disaster we're going to be facing with this motor. So what we have here is a 2-speed centrifugal wet clutch transmission. It is a fantastic, marvelous piece of simple engineering. This is a superior transmission, in my opinion, to the push belt CVT or the V-Matic type transmissions that Honda, Suzuki uses now on their Bergmans. BMW uses them on their C-Series scooters. But this design, it costs more to build, it weighs a lot more, and that's why these fell out of favor. You don't see a lot of these transmissions in the wild these days. So it has one speed, or the first gear, sorry, that runs directly off this little small clutch here on the crank. Let's take a good look at that. So when the crank is spinning, and I'll reposition the motor so we can see that, it's going to be spinning this clutch here and this gear. Now this clutch will engage when the engine speed reaches, 2,000 RPM or so. When that, or maybe 50, well, these rev high anyway, but it doesn't matter. When the engine speed reaches takeoff speed, this clutch will engage, and it will engage this lower gear here. Okay. Yeah. Make sure I get it right. And that is going to cause this gear to turn, and thus rotating the output shaft, or the drive gear. This is our drive gear. This is our output shaft. Okay. Now, when the engine speed reaches, or when the vehicle speed reaches approximately 10 miles per hour, this clutch, which is spinning the entire time, finally engages. And what that's going to do for us is it's going to engage a higher gear ratio jack shaft, which causes this to spin even faster. Let's get a better look at that. I'm going to use my, here it is. I'm going to use my circlip pliers. We're going to take this circlip off. One of the reasons that these transmissions, I find, are superior to the V belts, or I'm sorry, the CVT belt transmissions, is because they're so reliable and predictable. One of the problems with the modern V-matic transmissions is that, well, there's a lot of problems, and it's mostly heat related. The centrifugal clutches, which it has a very similar design to what we see here, the centrifugal clutches are of the dry clutch variety, which means that they're not lubricated by anything other than, the 2 or 3 permanently lubricated bearings that are inside the clutches, which are greased at the factory and they don't ever get lubricated. But the friction surfaces are never in contact with any oil of any kind. And the problem with that is a lot of heat builds up inside these drums, and very, very quickly, during takeoff mostly, and at low speeds, especially at low speeds when you're cruising through traffic. These clutches, these clutch bells, as they call them, tend to get very hot, several hundred degrees. And if they get hot enough, they can turn blue. If they get even hotter, they can begin to warp. And that's when you really start to run into problems with today's modern scooter. And everybody uses that design. Suzuki, Honda, BMW, everybody. Kimco, the list goes on. Now, this particular design doesn't have an infinite ratio of gears like a CVT does. Instead, it has 2 fixed gear ratios. It has your takeoff ratio, and then it has your cruise ratio, which is what this clutch I have in my hand, that's what it's for. Let me pull this all out here, making sure not to lose those, because they're in a very specific orientation. So this is our cruising clutch, if you will. And in its job, hold on, I lost my train of thought. So anyway, yeah, so we have 2 fixed ratios. And because it's bathed in oil, the entire assembly is bathed in oil, these clutches will last a very long time. These are actually meant to last the life of the bike, which is, under proper maintenance, it could be several engine rebuilds before these ever go bad. These engines usually require a rebuild, usually around 10 to 15,000 miles or so. This unit only has 3,500 on it. So anyway, moving forward, the problem with this design, so I'm sorry. So the transition between gear ratios is extremely buttery smooth. It's predictable. There's no shuddering. It just works. And because the oil helps keep these clutches cool, they don't wear out that very often. In fact, after 3,500 miles, these clutch shoes, are in mint condition. They're not even worn, not even beginning to wear. I can clearly see these grooves, which is good. If these grooves are gone, they're probably on their way out. But they're not. The grooves are all there. The material is well bonded to the shoes. The clutch bell, I see some markings from the clutches engaging and slipping, but that's okay. That's normal. I mean, you could put a brand new drum in here today and then drive it a few miles, and you'll start seeing those marks form again. So this is a magnificent transmission design. I love these. I think it's similar, possibly even to the Honda-Matic, but which is a whole other topic. So, objectively, looking at this particular example, I see very little wear in this transmission. There's a couple of bearings that I can actually access, and I can kind of play with these a little bit. And these, by the way, this is a one-way clutch. There's a one-way clutch in here somewhere. Yeah. So this one-way clutch allows, and that's buried inside here, this allows the first gear ratio to drive the axle, okay, while the second gear kind of freewheels. And then when the second gear engages, the first gear begins to freewheel. And it's a pretty smooth handoff between the two ratios. I drove it around a little bit in the parking lot, and I was impressed by how amazingly smooth it was. Coming out of a long time of riding motor scooters, this was smoother than those. Of course, you feel a slight bump when the second gear engages, but I mean, come on. Now we're splitting hairs. So, the condition of this transmission. I was planning on a complete rebuild. I was planning on replacing chains and gears and guides and bushings and bearings and everything. And I'm looking at it right now and I'm saying, gosh, I don't need to replace a damn thing. It's in perfect condition. There is nothing wrong with anything here. It's all there. It's good. I can reach down into here, and I can feel the final drive gear. I'm sorry, the final drive bearing, the axle bearing, if you will, and it's buttery smooth. No notchiness, no roughness, nothing. It's what a bearing should feel like out of the box. The seal I was worried about. I may have to replace that seal. That's unfortunately not changing. I may have to. So I may end up replacing that final drive bearing anyway, just to get that seal done, because I know it leaks. The chains, I haven't done the length test, but I'm not even going to bother. I'm pushing these links apart, and pushing and pulling, and I'm seeing very little to no movement between these links. There's just no play in these chains. They're nice. The chain guides, there is no wear on these chain guides. They're still new. And they're not breaking apart. There's no signs of any cracking. The gears are in perfect condition. There's no chipping. And why would there be? At such low mileage, I mean, come on. So I think that I'm good. Now, I was originally, and one of the reasons that prompted me to pop this apart was I was very concerned that the final drive gear, hold on, let me get this clutch back on there, clutch drum. I was concerned that the final drive bearing, I keep saying gear, the final drive bearing was worn out, because I could grab the wheel and I could kind of wobble it a little bit. I could feel it, I couldn't see it. You know what I mean? Precursor to failure, right? Well, then I found out that and it makes perfect sense too. So let's put this back in so I don't lose all these parts. It goes on like that. Drops in place. Alright. I'm going to put this back in there. Like so. We're going to get our circlet. Put that back in. Where was I? So the final, the output bearing, I was worried about it. It's fine. End of story. Little snap ring. There you go. Okay. So this is fine. Inspection is over. What do we do now? Well, I don't know. What do you think? why don't we go ahead and recap my concerns with the engine and where I'm going to go from here, because I'm not done. This isn't over. I still need to. I had to replace this gasket anyway. I mean, it's possibly the original one, and you know it leaks. I need to get the crankcase apart so that I can change out the outer bearing, and I'm changing the bearing out of a matter of precaution. We know that the transmission may have had an easy life. The engine did not. The engine was the victim of poor tuning and poor maintenance. Maintenance being proper cleaning of the carburetor, etc., etc. So the engine is kind of the victim here, and this is where we need to focus our attention on. The entire top end we're going to replace. I already established that. But because I found a partially blocked oil port, the only oil port for this bearing, and it's got some caked up mud in there, I am highly concerned that this bearing could have seen some heat, and it could be on its way out. Even though it shows no signs of it, once a bearing is damaged, once the bearing overheats, it can lose some of its initial strength. The hardness of the balls can be lost through tempering or retempering, or there's another term for that, overheating, burning. Not only that, but there could be some buildup in that bearing. And I was considering flushing this port out with parts cleaner or carburetor cleaner would work, but that wouldn't be good enough. No, I need to split the engine, and that's easy to do. It's real easy. I just got to get the clutch. I'm sorry, to get the stator bell off, and I got to whack out a few screws and crack it open. And in the meantime, it's always a good idea to reseal the crankcase. I mean, you know, after 37 years, they tend to develop leaks. So let me roll this crankshaft over, and you can see how these gears interact. I'm going to time my finger just right. There we go. So you can see, here's our oil pump drive. It's a worm gear that runs off of the flywheel, which is inside here. And this is our first gear clutch. It hasn't engaged yet. None of these clutches are engaged. You just see their clutch bells freewheeling. So once this engine speeds up enough, once this shaft speeds up, this clutch engages, which is our second gear, which then, you know, we already went through that. All right. Well, I think at this point we're going to put this project aside, and I'm going to wait for some more parts to arrive. I've got to get in some more tools. I'm going to lightly reassemble this so that I don't lose any parts. And so here is, by the way, here is the other side of the drive shaft, and there is no bearing on this end. It mates with the cover right here, and there's no bearing. There's no bearing in there. So it's basically just lubricated by oil, which is why it's so important to change the oil in these things. And it just kind of rolls on there, and it's good and tight. I don't feel a lot of play in there. It's nice and tight. So I really got lucky, and yeah, I think it's all going to be great. The sad thing is, no matter what I do to it, it's going to have a maximum speed of maybe 40 miles an hour or so. But preserving a piece of history, a piece of culture history. Mopeds were really a unique part of American culture at that time. I mean, they only came on the scene because of a gas crisis. You know, because fuel was so hard to come by. That's the only reason they ever existed in the U.S. In European and Asian countries, they were a way of life. I mean, this is how people got around back then. In America, it was either drive this or, you know, an American vehicle that got 8 miles per gallon. You know, And that's really why they became so popular when they did. This gasket's got to be properly scraped off. I'm going to do that on my own time. At this point, I think I'm going to take this starter clutch, I'm sorry, the starter, yeah, you know what I mean. I'm going to take this thing, and I'm going to put it in my Evapo-Rust tray. We'll get this cleaned up and get all that rust off of there. That'll look nice. That'll look real nice. And I'm going to leave you with that.